Hey now, and how are you doing? Want to welcome you to the next episode of Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat. Today, we're going to bring my friend Matt on. We're going to talk a little bit about spirituality. We're going to talk about so many different things. He does so many different things, and he does it well. But the great thing about it, also, he has a great accent. One person once told me they thought I had an Australian accent, and I was like, hell no, I don't. I'm from New York, but this gentleman does. So, how are you doing, my friend Matt?
Hi David, how you doing? Yes, well, I live in Australia, but yes, the English accent hasn't really left me. So I've been here 15 years now, and no, I think my children sound obviously quite Australian because they were born here and everything like that. Um, but yeah, very English, despite Indian heritage, which kind of throws people off as well. Um, but yeah, glad to be here, mate. Appreciate it. It's nice to have like conversations like this because you don't really have them with many other people in kind of normal walking, at a cafe or at a pub or something like that. You don't really talk about these kind of important things, so it's nice to have the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. We got connected and I was really glad that we did because, the things that you talk about are, the things that we love here on the show, mindfulness, resilience, personal growth. Why don't you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit of about your story?
Yeah, sure. Well, my name's Matt Rai, Indian heritage, born in the UK, educated in the UK, lived in India when I was quite young, my with my grandparents when I was 12. So going from a very privileged upbringing in the UK and then going into rural Punjab in northern India was a massive kind of eye opener for me, and I think it stayed with me um, throughout my kind of career. Um, then lived in Canada after university. Lived in a van for 6 months, and then in Whistler before that to do a ski season. Went back to the UK, and then 15 years ago, I moved to Australia. One of the best decisions I've ever made. Two children here. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, set up a charity called Schools for Nepal. I've been to Nepal 5 times,
Wow.
and a lot of, Australian money goes a long way in Nepal. You can, for the equivalent of a couple of cars, like you can build a school for 100 kids. It's like bonkers.
Wow.
Um, and obviously I've got two children, 10 and 11, and knowing that quite a lot of it, especially in rural Nepal, you've got young girls that don't go to school. So it was kind of like, okay, well, what can we do to kind of do something? And it turns out, yeah, Australian money, English money, American money, Canadian money goes a long way in rural Nepal. So
Sure.
if my job is, well, we're all volunteers, so it's not my paid job. But if I can get a little bit of money from Australian companies, if I can just get a little bit of, a
Yep,
fraction of some
the
companies.
little bit that might not matter. I know there was a time that I was helping a school like that in Uganda,
Oh yeah,
and how much the dollar you know goes, and how they're able to purchase it. It was actually worse to ship actual products to Uganda because then it had to go through customs and things like that versus money. But because I had built up that relationship, I knew that it was really going to the right people, and
yeah.
I would get on weekly calls with the kids to, they didn't have a whole lot, but there was always a phone available and to talk to them. And we got to see how small the world really could be versus how large it is when you're needing some of those services.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's great for you. Shift your mind's perspective about what you've got. Like, so when I was, in India, when I was, 12, 13, 14, it was kind of, I came back to the UK and I was just like, all as grateful for like the shower, a warm shower and cold milk in a fridge, like just felt different. And I try, I still take it for granted now, but I try not to. But the work with the charity, which is called Schools for Nepal, like re-engages me with the communities in rural Nepal and kind of refocuses what's actually kind of important. And again, you kind of take for granted on a daily basis in the UK, so or in Australia even. So yeah, it's very cleansing.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's that paying back. And there's a quote that I use all the time about Muhammad Ali had said, "The price we pay to live on this planet is the service we do for others.
Yeah.
And why is that so important to you? So I guess some of it is because you saw the both sides of the coin, the extreme wealth, or at least different wealth in the UK, and when you were there as a young child, but then also going to India and Punjab, you know, there must be a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And even within the country itself, in particular, probably more know a little bit more about India, but the extreme kind of wealth there is actually there and the disparity. If you go to, say, Mumbai, or it used to be called what, Bombay. Um, it was called Bombay. But then you see the disparity between like the houses in ones and then the slums in just down the street.
Mhm.
And it's just stark. It's similar in kind of many places in the world, but I saw it firsthand in India, to some extent Nepal as well. Um, and it's you can get when I was a kid, it was you can get quite angry about these things, about like how
How
bad it is. But then it was, rather than just kind of whinging about it, which I did for a long time, it's kind of like, what can you, what small things can I do just to, I'm not going to change the world, but it's something I can help like a community or something like that. So it's kind of that circle of control and circle of influence. And most people, they worry about things that they can't control. And, you know, I try, and that was probably me, when I was younger. And so it's just like, what I can't control like the world, but what can I control like in terms of my behaviors? And that again, I guess the charity is a manifestation of that. It's something that I can do.
Sure, no, of course, and going forward, I mean, in your life, so you went through that, and you went to university. You lived in Canada, and I heard Whistler, with skiing and things like that. But I guess you've learned a lot of resilience in your life, and that's one of the things that you teach. That mindfulness and resilience.
Yeah, it was so you know it was, I guess it was, it's not what happens to you, it's like your reaction to it, right? So, and I guess from a personal point of view, and I haven't really spoken about this too much, but I'll just touch on it. So my mum, was a successful nurse, and then she went the wrong way in terms of fell into the wrong crowd, and she ended up going down, doing a lot of drugs, and then it kind of really unraveled for her quite badly. It ended up killing her in a heroin overdose.
Oh my God,
And
I'm
it
sorry.
was it was that reaction to her reaction kind of taught me a lot, and it can happen to absolutely anyone. Like, she was a
100%.
successful, beautiful, you know loving nurse, and then a series of bad decisions because of the reaction that she had to adversity, and it sucked. And then, I guess it has kind of taught me a little bit of that resilience, but also the gratitude of the position that I've been in terms of living in wealthy countries and having the opportunities to work, talk, speak to people like yourself, raise children here. It's that's kind of extremely important. But then when you talk about resilience and mindfulness, I think we have to be careful and define them, because these terms, I found that they can get overused, and people
100%.
don't know what they are, right? So, just be resilient. Well, what does that mean? Be mindful. What does that mean? So, and it's like the term God, it's so been, historically grossly overused, and people use it in adverse ways without even knowing what kind of the divine is. So, we've only got words to kind of point us in that right direction, but they are only words. And you mentioned before about thoughts in your head, and again, that they are just words as well. So, what I try to do is define what mindfulness is, which is, for me, a level of consciousness of thought. And if you're conscious of your thought, you can kind of separate yourself and the thoughts in your head to, your kind of a defined essence in everyone, I believe. And if you can kind of tap into that, it's fundamental to kind of that inner change. And after the inner change comes the outer. So, in terms of behaviors that you take on. So, and I guess so with the resilient side of things, you can have something bad happen. It's like, oh, just be resilient. But I think there's a step before that. It's just like being very conscious and aware of the kind of negative thoughts of the situation that you have, judging it impartially, feeling the emotions entirely. And I often tell my clients, like, Where is it in your body? And that's normally a quite a jarring question because maybe they haven't been as present enough to kind of go, actually, where is it in my body? Sometimes it's throat, often it's chest, um, but it's individual, right?
Yeah,
Um,
no, it's very personal because even
Absolutely.
mindfulness, there's times. I mean, I have a practice within myself on mindfulness where I try to separate. But there's times like this today. I went to acupuncture, right? The right place to go to, but I couldn't separate my, that busy mind or the monkey mind. And so but it's your definition was great in that mindfulness is a practice to separate. When we talk about the opportunities, when people say, I can't meditate, like, well, just separate the idea. Think of a leaf on the river, the old leaf on the river idea. Just let it pass. Don't try to grab the leaf. Don't try to think about anything else that comes along with the leaf, but continue to move it along. How do you do something like that, or how do you teach? Because I know that's part of your practice.
Yeah, it's I guess you have to be careful of well, firstly, it's observation of thought. So somebody who says like I can't meditate, well then actually firstly, again, definition, like what does meditation mean to that person? And
Right.
actually, so if we, set the parameter of what is meditation, it's that sense of kind of being absolutely present and not identifying with your thoughts. So if normally when you it's like, okay, I'm going to try and meditate and I'm going to try and you and think of nothing, but that's more thought, right?
Right.
So the first step would be is observation of thoughts. And normally what I do with my clients is like I actually probably don't use the term meditation because again, lots of people are kind of a little bit
Right. You have to
or maybe
combat.
no, and there's a bit of resistance to that, right?
Sure.
So I might not use the term meditation. But the first step in kind of that mindfulness and ultimately I believe what is kind of meditation is the observation of the thought. And normally you can catch it with the repeating negative patterns. Now, with many of my clients, there's commonalities around I'm not good enough, what if I fail, not worthy. Those the words the words are different, but basically they kind of point to that same thing of something within themselves, an ego, voice in their head that they identify with. So the first step to, I guess, mindfulness, presence, again, meditation is just only the observation. Oh, there's me saying that I might fail. Oh, there's me saying I'm not good enough, or whatever the repeating pattern is. And if you can get that person or my clients, if I can get them to kind of say out loud what their inner voice is, the negative one,
Mhm.
that's a big help.
Sure.
And once you start basically saying, catching yourself when you go, oh, there's me saying I'm not good enough. That's meditation for me, right?
Right.
It's observation of the thoughts of your mind. It's not like going happier thoughts, because that's what I think a lot of people think meditation is. It's just impartial observation of thoughts without judgment. And the brilliant thing about this process is that once you do it once, it's easier to do the second time
For
and then
sure.
the third time.
Mhm.
So the first time might be, just glimpses of it, and everyone has glimpses, normally after extreme exercise, or maybe they have it, when they pat their dog, or they go for a walk, or they hug their children. There's glimpses of presence, and that without knowing it, that happens. But you can actually replicate that consciously by just observing where you're sitting, a thought running in your head, and once that happens, there's like a new form of, again, I'm loosely using the term consciousness or awareness or presence, or you could say the divine, that opens up a little level of a new way of perception. I was going to say thinking, but it's not thinking. It's kind of below.
Yeah,
It's the
if you
opposite.
get to see it differently. I mean, like today, like I said, I had a challenge on kind of shutting my mind down. I had too much, you know, thoughts of it. Because well, sometimes I have it, but then there's other times that I could be just left alone, man. For hours meditating, which I never was able to do earlier in my life. So, what would you how do we overcome something like that? Because I think a lot of people when they think about meditation, they think about sitting on a hill and peace and love and things like that. But that's not, we can't have that constant in life. I mean, it would be really nice, but that's not happening. What do you suggest to people that, when they're going through those other periods to kind of clear their mind?
Well, actually, interestingly enough, I had this conversation with somebody just last week. I've been working with her for actually nearly a year. Um, and she's made some real leaps and bounds, and she is become quite self-aware, and she knows that that sense of kind of just a little bit of space and time just for her before she starts on her day, rather than wake up on the phone, sort the kids out, go go go. And what we did with her was, again, a kind of philosophy for my practices. I'm not going to tell you what to do. You will know what to do,
Right.
but I'm going to guide you to what works for you. So in this particular case, it was a case of, you know, where would you like to sit down and just have that time for yourself? Actually, sorry, there is a step before that. First, you go, is it worth your time? And normally, in fact, in every case I've spoken to with my clients that reach out, it's always yes, I should do it. It will benefit me. So once we've kind of had that established, like the task is worth doing, that's really key. After that, it's then finding, okay, how much time would you want? Because you mentioned sitting on a hill for 2 hours, right?
Yeah.
No one has practically, like, no one has that kind of luxury, as it were. All right, so let's work around it. How much time do you want to do? And then sometimes they're ambitious and they say half an hour, and I normally just condense it out. It's like, tell you what, just for this first week, let's just try 5 minutes. Let's
Right.
just try
Start off
five
slow.
minutes.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've found it established that, okay, I'm just gonna have 5 minutes. And then it's a case of like, okay, so where works for you? And that again varies from client to client. In this particular one, it's just like I could just be on my be on my bed cross-legged. And then she described what was it. And again, she has all the answers.
Hmm.
I'm not telling her anything. So for her, it was like I'd like to have a ritual of lighting a candle. Oh, I would have done my morning routine. So the kids would have gone off, and before I turn my, look at my phone, I'm going to light a candle and sit in my room on my bed. It's like, do you have music? No, not for me. And I have 5 minutes. And then it's having that time as well. So it's like, when exactly are you going to do it? 9 o'clock for her. So again, it's just like asking the questions. One, is it worth it? And ordinarily, I don't think I've ever had anyone say, "Nah, it's not worth it. I can't bother." In which case, there's
Right.
no point.
Right.
Can't
If
force it.
you're completely resistant to it, then that day isn't for you.
You're not going to force it to them.
Yeah.
You can't do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But then you create the routine based on what their environment is, what their situation is. And then you say, what's the biggest obstacle for you doing that, you know, tomorrow? Um, and then, the build up towards it requires a little, obviously, yeah, self-discipline, and preparation. But again, I take them through that. And yeah, make it very, very practical. So like you say, mindfulness, but you actually make mindfulness practical to the individual.
Well, that's what it is. It's also that, the definition, right? So that's where that word gets thrown around too often because it's a catch thing. Oh, mindfulness. But it's a lot. It goes a lot deeper. It's how you can sit with yourself. It's that's the part. You could be mindful while you're driving, right? There's a lot of, you wouldn't close your eyes, you wouldn't do certain other practices, but there's lots of different things. I mean, you said music before, with some people, all they have to do is listen to music, and that's a very relaxing. It doesn't matter the type of music. You know, people used to laugh at me that I have a wide range of music. I could listen to something very mellow, and then I could also listen to something louder, and it's just my things, right? It's because it's music I choose. Even when I put it on shuffle, that becomes a little bit more, you know, safe for me. It helps me create those spaces because you do need that safe space, and it doesn't have to be a physical safe space, but a space that wherever you're sitting, and we all sit someplace.
Yeah, Absolutely. So I'll ask you, David, like because it is quite a personal, question, and everyone's got a definition. So, we talk about mindfulness, we're kind of used to it and everything like that. But
Yeah.
what would you say your definition of mindfulness is?
Well, my mindfulness is just to where I'm able to not worry about any, with anything. I don't worry about the tasks. I'm just focusing on me. It's very personal time for me. It could be a prayer. It could be just affirmations, depending on what I need in those moments. I mean, it could be one of the techniques I use to help reduce stress for me is havening. And when I use that, then I mean, it's the intention. You could just be doing breathing as, while you're sitting through something that might be frustrating. And that's why when I teach it, I'm like, there's so much that you could do with that. It doesn't have to be sitting by yourself in quiet. Quiet helps, right? Because it less distractions, but sometimes you could be in a lot of noise and still be able to be mindful.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it sounds like your definition of mindfulness is pretty much on par with the sense of being completely present. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay, so mindfulness and presence are kind of synonymous, right?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. So it's building presence in people's minds. Um, so I think people have more of a grasp
Uh,
of the term, yeah, presence rather
Yeah.
than mindfulness.
Well, yeah. So I think it's a self awareness, not necessarily presence, because presence could be something a little bit different. But that self awareness of how I'm reacting, how I'm breathing. Am I nervous? Am I breathing fast because of something? So I think it's a more self reflection, and then I guess we could kind of cut down the words either way, and
Yeah,
it all leads
it's
to
semantics, right?
yeah, right. It all leads to that inner way we think and what we're holding on to.
Okay, absolutely. And then, but and it's tapping into people's, um, I guess it's vocalizing as best as you can and using terms that are accessible and not too kind of, you know, woo-wooey.
Yep,
Um, and again, these terms like mindfulness sometimes have that, and even presence as well, because it's so. And again, so I think it's important that again, with my clients, it's just like, well, quite a lot of them because they come to me in the first place, and it takes a lot of bravery, I
for sure.
think, somebody to come and say like, "Hey, I feel a level of unease." I think it takes a lot of bravery. So they're already, if they do, when they do come to me, they're already kind of a step where they're open to kind of a little bit of that inner change, and that inner change always comes from obtaining somehow on a daily ritual basis that I believe the essence of that divine, which is termed as presence and mindfulness.
Yeah, no, for sure. You know, now when they come to you, I know you have a program. Level up your life. How does that integrate with all the things that you're doing?
Well, it's again, it was a kind of an attempt to kind of um be practical,
Hmm.
because there's I think sometimes in that kind of spiritual and mindfulness and the state, I think it's a little bit sometimes a little bit it kind of washes over people because it's just not. No, it just seems a little bit out there and a bit woo-woo-y type thing. Whereas kind of leveling up is something I think more practical it's practical terminology.
Hmm.
So and I've kind of probably maybe gone to a slightly kind of more youthful, I imagine kind of I used to play video games when I was a kid and it's like level up on, Sonic the Hedgehog and whatever, or Mario or whatever it was. So it was kind of, using a bit of that terminology. In terms of like, actual level, leveling up, it's so as a coach, I always think of what does success look like? What does leveling up look like for my client in, 6 months' time, in a year's time? What does success look like? And that is a very loaded and interesting question. You have phenomenal,
For sure.
conversations around that, right? It's just like, what do you want out of working from me? And the answers are very quickly, very honest, um, and very interesting. And normally their answers, when they answer quickly, it's normally what they think the world wants from them, whether it be in their family or parents or
Hmm.
their perceived role in society. It's like, I need to make some money and you need to get this job, those sort of things. They come up with that quickly. And then you have the conversation a little bit more. She's like, well, they've been trying to do that for 20 years, but there's still this level of unease. So let's strip it back a little bit. Just like, what really makes you feel that level of like, when were you happiest?
Mm.
What gives you the kind of that, when were you most content and at peace? Um, and then, once you've had that conversation, their then definition of what success looks like in 6 months, a year's time shifts fundamentally.
Sure. Yeah. It's, I was just talking to somebody about that. Is every now and then you got to look back, right? To see where you were, to see the progress you were at, which we don't know because it's all small, incrementally, uh, wins and successes, but that eventually build on to each other because, how we move from, being stuck at the beginning again, the ability to meditate or be in mindfulness mode at the beginning, and then you go into where you could do it for much longer, and it's based on that clarity and structure.
Absolutely. The question has to be had first before the practicalities of, sorry, there's somebody mowing the garden outside of me. You can hear that.
I don't
I
hear.
know they're drilling.
Okay.
Sorry, can you
I,
hear it? My
yeah,
bad.
we can't hear it. No.
Okay, great. Okay. So yeah, the bigger questions of what success looks like um has to be challenged quite quickly. Um, and they normally come to the conclusions just like, oh my God, the reason why I'm feeling uneasy is because I've been chasing the wrong thing, right?
Hmm.
And then in terms of practical things, again, they have their own answers. It's just like, well, and for example, one of my clients was just like, I feel better when I go for a walk. She's like, when was the last time you went for a walk? Maybe 6 months ago. It's like, right, okay. So what can you what can you do to make your life better that you know from experience has in the past? And why are you not prioritizing that now? Um, and it's always a very interesting one. Most of my clients say it's like too busy, I'm too busy, I'm too busy. And that's fine. Everyone gets busy. I get it. Like
Yep.
everyone's busy,
Right.
right? So, but I always shift that from, I know I do it, right? But I changed it with myself. She's like, I'm too busy to do that. It's actually I've shifted the terminology to, that's not important for me, and that's not important enough for me to do. And when you do that, it shifts something a little bit different. So then you're prioritizing things, and it's different to being too busy, because
Hmm.
busy is like the world coming onto you.
Hmm.
Whereas if you're prioritizing, it's you taking a little bit more control about what is important to you. And going for a walk with your children, or having a coffee with a friend, yeah, I'm too busy for that. She's like, no, you're not prioritizing it. And
Right.
that's okay. And it can be quite a hard conversation for them to have. But once they realize that, it's like, you're right, actually, I'm not prioritizing what I really want to do. And that takes maybe a little bit of time to kind of for that penny to drop. But that's always an interesting conversation to have again with my clients when they've kind of come to the realizations. It's like, I always say I'm too busy, but actually I'm not prioritizing what I want to do.
Right. It is so powerful on when you realize that it's a choice, right? It's how we want to, as you said, prioritize what we're doing. Everything becomes a a choice. The things that we eat, the time that we spend, it's not always that we don't have time. It's just we haven't made the time. We would rather sit and watch TV. We would, there's whatever distraction you might want to do. There's a lot of things that you could do once you're focused completely differently.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So how do you help people focus? I come in and I'm willing, right? You have to have somebody who's willing. What does that look like?
Well, I draw quite a lot of from personal experience as well. So, my son is 11. He was diagnosed with autism ADHD about 5 years ago. So I read a load of Dr. Gabor Mate books because I didn't know what
Hmm.
it was,
Yep.
and that's in a ADHD is like it's the notion of like actually. not being able to focus, but actually, when you read a little bit more about it, actually, my son can really focus on things that he's
Right.
actually
It's
interested
hyper focused or distracted.
in.
That's what
Exactly.
it is. Yeah.
Exactly. Like he he wanted to learn how to play chess. So he was just like watched a ridiculous amount of videos about these chess moves about, and then now I can't win a game off him. Now that doesn't mean he's that he's got ADHD, which suggests that he can't focus. Well, it's actually slightly different. It's not quite that. I'm going around this. You can probably guess now where I'm going with this, but my son found out that diagnosed ADHD autistic, and then later on, actually, I'm late diagnosed ADHD autistic. So your question about how do you get my clients to stay focused?
Mm.
Well, actually, yeah, it's very relevant. And so I do have a stimulant medication for ADHD, which actually, which generally helps me. But, you know, medications is one thing. It obviously, yeah, obviously can help, but it's it's also finding the things that you care about, and then you can use that kind of focus. The focus comes in beautifully. But if you're doing something that you are really not interested in or bored at, or whatever, it's like it's a really hard thing to do. So, you know, when you say it's like, how can you focus? You've got to find out, what do they want to focus on? Like, what's important for them to focus on,
Right.
firstly.
You're right. You got to ask the right questions. It's and I know with being ADHD, got to kind of slow down the noise, right? The distractions. It doesn't mean there's not going to be any distractions, but you have to kind of slow it down, and then helping them identify by asking better questions is always helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, normally if someone says like, oh, I can't, I can't focus, or I'm really distracted or something like that, it's because they're doing something boring, right? And 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 that's really that's a problem, right? If you're doing something day in, day out that is boring, it is going to be difficult to focus. If you give them something that they care about and they're passionate about, most people will really, again, they might have scattered ideas about what they want to do on it. And then it's a case of breaking that down and just doing one small step. There's a wonderful, fairly recent book, James Clear, but which is very practical, Atomic Habits. So you can use the practicalities of just very small steps, um, and, ridiculously small steps, and then progression towards that to kind of have that focus. But ultimately as well, it's kind of, firstly, before that, before the practical steps of doing something, that's, what is it that you want? Like, that's the question.
Mhm.
And if you have that why, and then that's a Viktor Frankl quote, isn't it? Or actually a Nietzsche quote. So it's like, if you have a why, which is a fundamental question, it's like, why am I doing these? Why am I here? What am I doing? If you have that powerful why, which is a great conversation to have, you can kind of overcome any how. And again, that would address the kind of what the question was in terms of focus.
Yep, no, 100%, because it really is about your passions and what you're willing to do, right? To work. Again, when we were talking before about, are you willing to do the work? And if it's a no, there's nothing that I could do to make you do the work. We can have some conversations, but if you're that resistant, it becomes that much of a challenge. It's when that, when I used to work in the recovery space, I would say just crack the window open a little bit, because when you have the window closed in the winter, or even during the summer, if there's a breeze, you can have the cracked window, air can pass through. Close the window, you can't get past, or you can't get the wind through. You can't get air through a cracked window. So it really is learning how to do that and managing all that. All that becomes the larger practice of how we can heal ourselves and how we can sit with ourselves a lot better.
Yeah, I agree, David. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So when you do a normal session, when you start taking through, you have again an interesting blend of experiences and practices that you've accumulated over your life, because you have, living in India is a different experience, that you learned some techniques, I'm sure, from that experience, even though you were younger. And then being in the UK is different than Canada, even though, I mean, I know they're two separate countries, but they, what are your go-to techniques to help people through growth?
Go-to techniques. Well, again, it's what we were mentioning at the top of the call, right? What your show's all about.
Hmm.
And without getting bogged down with the semantics of just mere words, they're just pointers,
Yep.
aren't they? But it is developing that an individual's self-awareness, that sense of presence and observation of the thoughts in their head. That is always the first, probably the most challenging and the most kind of in-depth conversation to have. Um, and normally there's let's say a perceived negative voice in their head, and then I'm always interested about where is that come from, and it could be from a parental figure or a carer when they were younger. It's something along those lines, and their insecurities manifest in another voice. Now they think that voice is them,
Mm.
and agreed, it's part of their personality, but it's not their being, as it were, their divine essence. It's not that. It's a voice in their head. Now, interestingly, when you separate, as we mentioned at the top of the call, when you separate that voice in your head, I normally actually say, like, who is that voice?
Mm.
So in one case, it was me when I was 15. And then we kind of actually create a bit of a picture around that voice as well, rather than kind of going, oh, just go away, voice. And then, or hearing the voice and escalating and creating anxiety. You kind of actually identify what that voice is, who it is, where do you feel it in your body, and almost separate it. If you can create almost like a cartoon, you could even create a cartoon character. And all what this all does is build this kind of character around this voice that you can separate from your true being. And it's just this voice here. And then from there, it's a case of, and I always, one of my favorite questions is like, how is that voice serving you? Now that question is always met with sometimes a level of resistance and confusion.
Sure.
It's like, well, it's not serving me. I don't want it to be there. But actually, when you talk a little bit more about their individual experience, that voice is there, and it's normally there to keep them safe. Now, their reaction to that voice is different. Their reaction to that voice is either go away or spiral into anxiety. But if they nurture that voice, identify it as, say, a younger version of themselves, and they go, "Why are you here?" That question is really interesting, and that there normally is the normal is it's like I'm there. It's that voice and that essence, that present, sorry, that entity inside themselves is there to keep them safe.
Hmm.
Now that requires a level of awareness and deep conversations. But once that comes through, their relationship to that voice fundamentally changes.
Yeah, 100 is that, and that's really where it becomes a process. To start off the process initially, but then that's a really deeper level when you're able to start to do that. When you're able to start to parse your thoughts, to have the ability to see what be an observer even in your own life.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's another wonderful quote that I forget who to attribute to, but it's we're not human being, not humans having a spiritual experience.
Right.
You're spiritual beings having a human experience, and that quote changed me a lot in terms of that's again being able to disidentify with a lot of the thoughts in my head, observe them impartially, and then rather than just react, there's that space in between that stimulus and response where you have a level of consciousness presence, and then your behavior to that stimuli, again, we'll say it's a negative one, changes because you're effectively more conscious of it. And again, that change it once that kind of level of awareness um, of what they're saying to themselves comes into manifests within within themselves there, it opens up like that a big door of kind of opportunity for perception.
Sure. 100%. Yeah. Um, so, yeah, how do you, well, I guess there are multiple levels, right? So we were talking about the beginning, this, but you continue to grow. And how would you suggest somebody maybe on where I'm at, right? So I've done meditation. I do it regularly. It's part of my human experience. It's part of my practice. Where do you know? Where do you keep learning? So, or even yourself, where do you keep learning to kind of push yourself?
Well, that's a really interesting question because, you know, w- I think fundamentally humans want to, learn and grow, as it were, but then you need to define for yourself, for example, David, what does that mean? If someone comes to you, it's like, I want to, get better and grow, and it's okay, well, what does that mean? Because it might mean something completely different to me. What
Right.
is it? What does it
And
mean
there's
to
so
you?
many different areas of our lives. It's not growing is not you can grow in one area and not, need to grow or want to grow in another area. It's not, the word grow is very broad. It's too broad in a lot of ways.
So in your instance, for example, if you were saying, what areas, what does that mean for you? What areas would you like to develop or grow? What does that mean? What does that mean?
Yeah, so for me it's where I'm already pretty self-aware. I what I want to do is not have those moments today. I mean, where was distracted. I knew I had all these things that I wanted to do, and I usually am successful at carving out that hour for myself to say, this is the time that I want to focus. So that's, it's always an opportunity to kind of test the world out on it. Because now when I have those opportunities, I'm like, okay, why was I so fixated on the few things that I was thinking of during my hour, right? The hour that I chose to schedule in my day to have for taking care of myself.
Okay. So your opportunity for growth then would be, you said it would be to be more focused effectively. Is that right?
At times, yeah, sure.
Okay. But when you have that hour for yourself and you were aware that you were thinking of two or three things, that in its essence for me as well, anyway, is still an element of meditation because you are able to observe that you're unfocused.
Mm.
So in that hour, was it an observation after or was it during?
It was during, that's where sometimes the quiet space, I'm like, okay, so now I got to think about this, and that's when I try to not attach to each thought rather than just watching it come in and seeing what I feel like. But then there's times that we do. I know I do, where I get caught into a thought that I needs a little bit more attention, which while I'm not thinking about anything else, I can get a little bit more clarity. So there are times that having multiple thoughts, and it's how you perceive it and how it you work through it.
Well, yeah, and again, I mean, yeah, Einstein was just like, problems of the mind can't be solved by the level of the mind, right? So what you're doing, or what you've very well articulated, is that there's a thought that comes in, and then automatically after that, there's loads of other thoughts that comes in, which gives you the perception of being unfocused, right? So in that case, and about, as well as I do, it's all it is being kinder to yourself and just observing the thoughts and going, oh, there's me, there's my mind going a million miles an hour, going bonkers, right? There it is. There's another thought. There it is. And that observation is the essence of presence and mindfulness. It's being, just catching yourself being unfocused is wonderful thing. So next time it happens, rather than, again, you have a stimulus, which is a thought, and then it triggers into a million other thoughts, and that can go. But then it's just, oh, there's me thinking of a million things. It's just that. And then again, once you do it once, it becomes a little easier the next time.
Yeah, well,
I'm
I love what you mentioned also is give ourselves grace. So I
Yeah.
didn't beat I didn't beat myself up over it. Oh, I wasted the time. You know, everything that's supposed to happen happens in the right time, and sometimes it is good to kind of stir it up a little bit and be thinking of a bunch of things because you might catch that one piece. I mean, that's what happens often when thinking of a few different things, then I catch on to one thing and I'm like, oh, now I see it much clearer. Sometimes we have to kind of kick the dust up, what I call it, and then see what lands. And because we with break those pattern, right? It's a pattern interrupt on the way of thinking.
That's an interesting observation. So, I think ordinarily I'd say, if you have a million different thoughts going off at the same time, and then all of a sudden, oh, that's the idea. I, you know, Fortunately, I have statistics on this, but I'd suggest that if you have a million thoughts and then you come to the answer, I think that's less likely. Whereas if you have a million thoughts, are aware of your thoughts, take a few seconds, and then I believe that answer will come. But I
So,
think it requires that level of consciousness, and it alludes to my previous comment about problems of the mind can't be solved on the level of the mind. You need to bring in that level of consciousness, which is awareness of the mind, and then that focus and answer, as it were, would manifest.
okay, well, thank you. I know we're getting close to the end of the episode, and I always like to have everybody step into the magic garden, and you've given us lots of advice. I'd like to see if we can have one final piece, one seed that we can grow, we can plant. One more piece of advice that you might offer up that might grow immediately, or it might need a little more nurturing for the audience.
Well, I'll keep it on topic. Um, I'd ask your listeners, and I've asked a few of my clients as well. I'd ask your listeners, what's the repeating and recurring negative comment that sends you into a bit of a spiral? Um, what is that? And then, the process of writing it down, even making a character of it, and again, it's very individual. Everyone, you've got 8 billion people in the world. You can have 8 billion rather, different responses. But then it's what's that negative? Who is it? What does it sound like? Where does it feel in your body? Does it have a name? Creating a bit of a caricature for it. Um, I think that's a really cool thing to do. And then after that, obviously, there's more to it in terms of like, but and then having a slightly different relationship with that kind of perceived negative element. Um, that might be a little bit too long-winded, not
No,
hopefully.
no, no, not at all, not at all. I mean, again, it's like I said, it's a seed that it might not grow from. It's not Jack and the beanstalk, but it's one of those things that we can nurture it, right? You get a thought, and then you nurture it, and then it really grows on you. And that's the magic in the garden, right?
Yeah,
Listening to
cool.
somebody like yourself. And how can people find you?
Well, I'm on the internet.
Okay.
That whole thing still going around. Yeah, Matt Rai, Mattrai, dot com dot au, and then there's a schools for Nepal stuff, which is again just I've got the website for that, Instagram and YouTube as well. And I've just actually, weirdly enough, you talked about music before. I've actually prioritized
Mm.
music. So I've just released an EP, which is streaming everywhere, called Silence as Bombs Fall Down. It's a 12-string guitar and acoustic rock folk music. And I'm
Nice.
releasing a single off that in, gosh, like 2 weeks. So I'm playing around Melbourne, which is really, really cool. So there's 100 people at a gig we went to last weekend. Yeah, really excited. My kids' games to watch, and it got a lot of love and support. And it's something I've been doing, years and years. And then I prioritized being a dad. But now they're a bit older, I can start, I'm going to dust off the guitar and see what happens there. So I'm enjoying that as well. So if you type into
Nice.
Matt Rai and pick your poison, really.
Okay, no, that's fine. We'll make sure it's obviously in the show notes, but we'll also make sure that everybody can get connected to you to learn a little bit more.
Top man, David. Appreciate that.
Okay. All right, and thank you for coming, Matt. I really appreciate it, and we'll stay connected.
Yeah, take it easy, David. Appreciate your time.
Okay, and for everybody else, as always, peace and love in your life as the foundation. I wish that all for you. And then when you're bringing a bat, hit your sweet spot. And remember, bring some awesome thoughts like Matt did today, and you'll always knock it out of the park. Thanks so much.